trickle it.
Hello everyone, I'm Lisa Pritchard, welcome to the library and today's panel presentation, American Horror and Hauntings. This is part of the library's year-long PACE-sponsored series of events celebrating America at 250. At this time, please take a moment to silence your devices. And be warned that some of the content in this presentation may be upsetting, and there are some spoilers. Our panelists today include the library's own Taylor Humphreys, Zachary Quick, and Olivia Lackey, and Jefferson College English professor Tim Bain. They will offer insights into the history of American horror, Missouri haunted locations, the king of horror himself, Vincent Price, and the 2024, evidently, instant classic horror film, Strange Darkness.
You might only be me saying that.
Well,
horror is a genre that, more than any other, is written with the primary goal of creating an effect in the audience, a feeling of dread, of fear, the finger of ice that creeps down your spine, and the knowledge that eyes are absolutely watching you from the shadows. Horror as a genre is devoted to manipulating your emotions, to making you feel afraid. Sometimes that fear is created from supernatural beings, the eruption of some ancient evil, a monstrous transformation, vampires, ghosts, the undead. Other times, that fear is coming from the psychological, the intermingling of reason and madness, unreality and doubt, paranoia, the uncanny, the exaggeration of the bizarre and grotesque. Horror as a genre evolved out of Gothic literature with its reliance on creepy Gothic settings, such as the dark and isolated, moldering castle with hidden passageways, mysterious hauntings, and inexplicable events, the stony gargoyle perched high above you, the painting whose eyes follow you around the room. These images are still sometimes used in today in fiction to let you know that something scary or creepy is afoot. But the wondrous immortality of horror is that it is not stagnant, but it evolves with the times. Horror stories today can sometimes get their power from their realism. They may start out with bright, everyday locations and characters who are the very types of people you would recognize from your own life. And then, throughout the story, situations evolve into terror, fear, disgust, and disquiet. So let me ask you this then. If horror is designed to repulse and to frighten, why is it so popular? Why do we personally subject ourselves to horror, seek it out, and really love it sometimes as a genre? For some, it may serve as a catharsis. Maybe you work through your fear while knowing that you are safe and secure. And for others, maybe it is seeking out that physical response that it elicits, making us feel nervous, paranoid, and jittery, making a fictional experience seem even more real. Horror can help us address our fears that are often ignored, that normally exist only in the shadowy recesses of our minds, shoved way in the back behind cobwebs and hundreds of glowing red eyes. Another question to maybe think about during our panel is if you only enjoy certain elements or types of horror, but avoid others at all costs, are you still a fan of horror? For me, there's some types that I love to read about, but would totally avoid in the movie form. But I think that since fear can be very specific to each individual, it's also true that everyone's love or hatred of horror can also be very specific and individualized, but it is no less real because it is particular. Since this panel is related to America 250, I also want to think about horror in the context of America. So fear and horror have probably been around since the first human told a ghost story around a fire. And then we have the actual genre of horror evolving out of Gothic literature and eventually separating into its own distinctive type. And most likely, some early inspiration for horror came from folklore and myths. Place, geography, culture, they all have a great deal to do with what people find frightening, and so also in what types of horror evolve. So I think that we can see in early America, the New World, inspiring its own types and evolution of horror. Themes specific to early American horror stories come from religion. Think about the Puritans and the insanity of the Salem witch trials. From the not knowing emptiness of frontier wilderness, and also from the uncanny, the strange and the familiar. So we're going to take a look at one of these early American horror stories, and also think about the idea of masks as they appear in horror fiction. So in 1836, Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote a short story called The Minister's Black Veil, which is set earlier in 1700s Puritan New England. The author, Hawthorne, had family ties to the Puritans and to the Salem witch trials. He had an ancestor who was a judge, I think a great-great-grandfather, who was harshly sentencing witches during the Salem witch trials. Hawthorne wanted to distance himself from that ancestor, and so he changed the spelling of his last name, adding that W. We continue to see himself distancing himself from the Puritans in his works, many of which have anti-Puritan themes, but nevertheless, he often writes about inherent sin and evil. So, The Minister's Black Veil is a short story that focuses on this reverend of a small town in Puritan New England. One day out of the blue, as his congregation is coming into church, they notice that Reverend Hooper is now wearing a veil that obscures almost his entire face, except for his mouth and his chin, sort of about like this. The townspeople begin to speculate about this veil, and they feel this odd dread about it. "I don't like it," muttered an old woman as she hobbled into the meeting house. "He has changed himself into something awful only by hiding his face." And so they sit there, speechless, confused, shrinking uneasily from what they feel to be his eyes upon them. The veil obscured his face, and he refused to take it off. But his outward actions did not change. He was irreproachable in those actions, he was kind, he aided his parishioners in their lives. However, the townspeople shudder and shun him. Children run away from him. His fiancée breaks off their engagement, and he lives a long life apart from his fellow man and shunned. As an old man on his deathbed, he declares that people should tremble also at each other, that people have avoided him and fled from him, only because he has obscured his face with a harmless piece of fabric. But that also other people are hiding their innermost thoughts from one another, effectively also wearing their own veils. "On every visage a black veil," he says. He then dies, having never removed the veil from his face and stopping everyone who might try. And he is buried and rollers with it still over his face. So why is this an effective story? And do we think it is? I think so, because it makes you think about, why are masks scary? Why are they showing up all over the place in horror fiction? In this story, we have an essentially nice guy who never did anything wrong but wear this mask, and that alone makes everyone afraid of him and worry about his intentions. What is he thinking about under there? Is he watching us? What's going on? And even when we know who is wearing the mask, it obscures emotions and feelings. And we so often look at faces to give us cues about a person's thoughts and intentions. But masks are meant to facilitate disguise and obscure identity. They give us the ability to act anonymously. We may not know who is committing the act, and it could be anyone. Masks are often parts of horror and terror. We see them a lot in Halloween costumes, but they also show up in a lot of horror and slasher films. Masks can dehumanize and make a face uncanny, and in an unmasking, the villain often loses their power over us. Think about the villains in Scooby-Doo. When they are unmasked, it instantly strips away all the supernatural elements, and the monster simply becomes a very greedy human villain. Masks provide uncertainty and illusion. They leave much up to the interpretation and imagination of those of us reading or watching the horror unfold. When the imagination is left to run wild, it can conjure up images and conclusions that are possibly even more dreadful than the reality. So horror is not only a genre that intentionally creates a feeling of dread and of fear, it can also hijack your imagination, making you an accomplice in your own terror.
So now take all the terror and the feelings of fear and try to take all that and isolate it to a physical location. That is what we tend to do when we visit haunted houses, whether it be Creepy World, the Cop Factory, the Darkness, the Limp Mansion. But we also tend to look at some of these old, creepy-looking buildings. We have such a fascination with these haunted locations. And so today I wanted to just take a moment to not only look at the haunted locations that we appreciate, but I wanted to focus it on Missouri and a lot of the famous locations within our wonderful state. And then I also want to make mention and appreciation for one in particular, which is not too far from where we are currently seated, the Morse Mill Hotel. So join me as we focus in on Missouri's haunted locations. And so Taylor did a great job of describing why we love horror, how it embodies the experience that we create. And so that tends to be the same case with haunted locations. We think it might be inhabited by evil spirits, might think that something is lurking within, beneath, around. Even if we have scientific evidence that may determine that, oh, it's probably a leaky, a leaky pipe, it could be whistling pipes, it could be creaky floor, but we still are drawn to it. Why are we drawn to it? Because we see it with the various forms of media, whether it be film, television, literature, social media, our friends and family. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. And so we tend to still gravitate towards it because we like to be scared. We like the idea of the fear can be isolated to this physical location. And so we create that fear sometimes even in our own head. Emily Dickinson had a great way of encompassing this and stating, one need not be a chamber to be haunted. One need not be a house. The brain has corridors surpassing material plates. So we create that fear inherently, even to make the building that we look at seem more scary than it actually is. And so we still love to go to these haunted houses, and we love to visit these places that look creepy, whether it be down the street, whether it be St. Louis, whether it be some of the more famous ones outside of our state, such as the Stanley Hotel, Alcatraz, Amityville. Despite many of the fears being debunked, we still seek these places out. And so now I want to at least draw attention back to our own heritage within the state of Missouri. So some of you, of course, have heard of a few of them, such as the Lemp Mansion, or the Missouri State Penitentiary, perhaps even the Pythian Castle, some of these locations where horrific things happened. We want to go there. We want to see what the fuss is about, because there have been supernatural visits, where they try to determine if there's been ghostly activity. That happens quite a bit in some of these historical locations. But I also want to draw attention to some that you may not be familiar with. In the great area of Cape Girardeau, there are many locations, and I won't be able to cover all of them even within the state of Missouri or even within Cape Girardeau. But if you want to find some scary locations, you could visit the Sherwood Minton House, the Rose Bed Inn and Breakfast, or even the one that you see on the cover here, the Glen House. Now, I've known someone who even got married on the very front porch of this house. They were not deterred by ghosts, but there are tours that are given at this location. And it was even on an A&E special trying to discover the supernatural aspects of that place. Whether it be the children's room, whether it be the study, whether it be piano keys playing in the distance. It still is a place that people gravitate towards. They can get tours. Is it haunted? You need to judge of that. But that is just one of the many locations within the state of Missouri. Did you know that there are some haunted places in addition to the Morris Mill Hotel located here within Jefferson County? For example, in Peevely, Missouri, there's a place called the Stone House where it was reported in, I believe, one of our local newspapers, probably about the 80s, when they were doing renovations on the house. One of the workers would go into the house at night and he'd hear running all above him on the floor just above him. He'd hear this strange noise as being alone in the house. So it scared him to the point where he decided, I will not work on this house at night anymore. And that's just a little bit down the road. Or the famous home of Thomas C. Fletcher, quite a renowned historian or important figure within the state of Missouri. There are reports of it being haunted as well. You can visit the location today. It's located within Hillsborough. And so that's another famous location within Jefferson County. Or what about House Springs? There may not be a physical building associated with it today, but if anyone is familiar with the legend of House Springs, you know that terrible things happened. It was a land associated with conflict between settlers and Native Americans. And so there have always been reports of hauntings in that location, whether it be at the intersection of MM 30, located at that corner, all along the Old Town, House Springs, and many other places if you dare to take a look, listen. But now I just want to draw attention to another particular historic location, the Morris Mill Hotel. Located about 15 minutes from the college. It was originally the homestead of one John H. Morris, who is famous for a variety of reasons, including the Sand Creek Covered Bridge, the original Graboid Road. He was instrumental in both of those. And I could do a presentation just on him. I think he has quite the impact on Jefferson County. But after he died, it became a boarding house. And one of the owners of the boarding house, at the time was named Bertha Graham, but you would later know her as Bertha Gifford. If anyone is unfamiliar with Bertha Gifford, she was one of the first prominent female serial killers in the United States. So she was one of the prominent guests, so that's why some think that the location is haunted. But it has a lighter note. It was a very popular resort area before major road construction, so it had the likes of Charles Lindbergh, Al Capone, it had Charlie Chaplin, so it had some famous characters as well. But for many years after other resorts such as Lake of the Ozarks became more popular, then it became decrepit, abandoned. So it looked very haunting, very frightening. And so over time, it maintained that look. And it has had several paranormal investigations to look at the Morrisville Hotel. Some have felt scratches on them. Some have seen lights that could have been apparitions, ghosts. Who knows? But it's still an area that they've gravitated towards. There have been visits where you could do ghost tours of the house, stay overnight, book rooms, or if you feel adventurous enough, you could buy the house today. It is available on the market. If you so choose. But it's still one of our locations. It still represents one of our American heritage locations. Even though it may be private ownership, it's still part of our Jefferson County history and our American history. And part of our history of wanting to visit these locations, wanting to be scared for scared's sakes. Because we create that fear as a form of distraction sometimes. And so, whether these places are haunted, whether they're just older locations, whether we believe in apparitions, whether we don't, I will leave you with this quote from Washington Irving. I am therefore a ready believer in relics, legends, and local anecdotes of goblins and great men, and advise all travelers who travel for their gratification to be the same. What is it to us whether these stories be true or false, so long as we can persuade ourselves into the belief of them and enjoy all the charm of the reality? So remember, these are scary places, but we need to respect the locations, the people, and the stories that they tell.
All right. I'm going to try to project a little bit. Can y'all hear me? So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. We've heard a lot about literature and spooky places and the things that really draw us in. So now I'm going to talk about a particular icon of the genre in film, Vincent Price. Out of curiosity, are you all familiar with Vincent Price? Have you seen this man? No? Okay, only a few. This is very exciting for me. You'll all hopefully learn a lot today. So Vincent Price is a horror icon, and I'm going to talk a little bit about not only his work, a little bit about the man himself, but also how his films kind of defined an era of horror by reflecting the shifting American culture. So Price was known for his very distinctive voice, his suave aesthetic, and his black humor. He was a prolific actor. He starred in nearly 180 different movies and television specials over the course of his career. So we won't get to touch on most of them today, but they're all worth checking out. And the thing that really was distinct about him, especially among his contemporaries and predecessors in the horror genre, was his adaptability to blend campy humor with horror. His characters were by turns menacing and self-mocking. They were sinister and also wildly dramatic. And the man himself became so synonymous with the characters that it was almost like one in the same. And they were so, he was featured so frequently and just became so popular that even if you haven't seen one of his movies, odds are very high that you've encountered a reference or an homage to him or his work at some point in your life. A little bit of background about Vincent Price, in case you did not know, he was actually born in St. Louis. And he was born and raised here, born in 1911. His father actually owned the National Candy Company, which is also just a fun, interesting connection to Halloween. He was a classically trained theater performer, and when he made the shift to movies, he was actually more of a kind of supporting character. Sometimes he'd play romantic leads, but he was mostly just known for being like handsome and suave, and nothing kind of like the characters he would become synonymous with later on. All of that changed though in the 1950s. So around the 1950s, horror was kind of in its own upheaval. In addition to American culture, we were in like the post-war peace, prosperity era, which ushered in a lot of new changes in popular culture in general. Because teens, for the first time ever, were considered a demographic worth marketing to. They had money to spend, and people were like, we want that. So, movie studios were looking at ways to get people back into the theater. They were kind of reckoning with how to deal with this shift. They were worried about declining profits, and they were also in competition now with the popularity of television. So they were really looking for ways to get people back into the theater, into those seats. And horror was still pretty popular, fantasy horror especially, which was now being infused with like post-war tensions, sci-fi elements, apocalyptic elements. And so they were like, all right, well, why don't we go ahead, we'll lean into horror, and we'll add gimmicks. So the 1950s become full of horror movies with gimmicks involved, which makes sense because they make any kind of movie viewing experience an actual experience instead of just something that you're watching. And Price's big break comes during this time in the form of 1953's House of Wax. So this is the movie that kind of ultimately sets him on his path to play iconic villains. He really hadn't ever ventured into horror before, which was interesting because it lended itself so well to playing these larger-than-life characters, which really was perfect for him. He really enjoyed kind of villainy in general. He liked getting a rise out of the audience and feeling that tension when he was on stage. And horror was, of course, a perfect avenue for that. House of Wax itself was also a really notable film, partially due to its gimmick, which in this case was actually 3D. House of Wax was the first Technicolor 3D film produced from a major American movie studio. So that kind of made it notable in and of itself. It was a massive success. It earned like $4 million and kind of reestablished horror as a popular genre again. And it was kind of a big swing for the studio at the time because they had never produced any kind of 3D film, certainly not done by a major studio. Warner Brothers, though, was pretty desperate, and they were trying anything. And it ended up being something that really, really paid off. The other movie that kind of defines this era, especially in reference to Price, is 1959's House on Haunted Hill. So Price in this movie plays an eccentric millionaire who invites 5 people to his haunted house, and whoever manages to stay the night wins $10,000. But of course, many, many different antics ensue. And the thing that was distinct about this film, also a major success, was that its gimmick was something called Emergo, which was essentially a system that they would have in every theater of pulleys and wires, and they would fly out an inflatable skeleton over the audience at like key points of the film. So they were really into like all kinds of gags and things that would basically pull people in. This one was also a box office success. However, gimmicks were not long for this world in terms of horror. By the 1960s, the high points of horror were becoming a little bit unpredictable. Movie studios were having a hard time catching up with the whims of the youth. They weren't quite sure what was going to be successful. And so they decided to change their strategy and made literally like as many things as they could, as cheaply and as quickly as they could. And this was kind of the thing that set up Vincent Price for what would become his most iconic and acclaimed series, which were the Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe short story adaptations. So these literary adaptations were pretty popular with movie studios at the time because most of these stories were in the public domain. They didn't have to pay for it. They could just use that, produce a film, and get it out there as quickly as possible. And they really would not have ever been nearly the success that they are, or the lingering success that they are still considered, without the success of the first film, which was House of Usher. So that one came out in 1960. And House of Usher was unique in many ways. It really did establish Vincent Price as not only like the guy you want to go to for horror, but it really helped capture the character of Vincent Price, his kind of menacing and yet like kind of dramatic and also like very fragile kind of character. House of Usher was also distinct for being the first film to purport this concept of the house as a monster. Creature features have been really popular for a long time, kind of starting with the Universal Studios monster movies, and even still to today. But House of Usher did not have a traditional monster involved. The director had to sell the studio on the house as the monster, which of course is fascinating to think about now when we think about our haunted house movies today. There's a lot of examples of the house as the monster, like its malicious influence over the people that live inside. It also introduced this trope of catalepsy, which became really popular with movies at the time, which was a trance-like state that mimicked the appearance of death and usually meant that you were about to get buried alive. A lot of movies used this at the time. It became like the peak, cinematic terror of this era. Later movies in this series, like Tales of Terror and The Raven, incorporated more aspects of farce and parody, which was perfect for Vincent Price, who had no issue leaning into campiness, doing some tongue-in-cheek, seeing the humor of things and kind of making fun of himself. And so by the time this series ends in the 60s, he's like a full-blown icon. He is basically at cult figure status, recognized as the master of the macabre, and he's being asked to participate in all kinds of features, some even that are kind of making fun of the exact kind of characters and gothic tropes that he has been embodying in these roles. Unfortunately, things cannot last and tastes do change. So by the 1970s, we're in kind of another whole upheaval. Traditional monster movies are officially dead. And studios are worried about declining audiences, and producers are not taking as many risks. They want a guaranteed hit, which means that they probably have to rely on things like sex and violence because they sell. And that kind of leads to the rise of the exploitation era of horror. And these things don't really jive with Vincent Price's whole deal. So he kind of saw the end, but he did still have a couple of successful projects during this era that really leaned into kind of like the cynicism of the time and self-mockery. So he's in a string of horror comedies where he plays these very outlandish and like disfigured characters who are overcome with madness and hell-bent on revenge. One of these is the abominable Dr. Phoebes, which also has the distinction of introducing what was at the time a very novel concept of having 8 or 9 murders in a single storyline, which is kind of now par for the course with slashers. But unfortunately, by about 1975, the horror scene in which Vincent Price had reigned supreme was kind of over. But he really made a lot of a splash in just those 15 years, which when you think about it is not a very long time to have made an impact in the way that we still feel today. One of these is, or a good example I can think of course, is his influence on Tim Burton. So he was enamored with Vincent Price. He made a short film while he was working at Disney called Vincent that was inspired by Vincent Price and actually got him to narrate. He also put Vincent Price in what would be his last film role, which was playing the inventor in Edward Scissorhands. So Vincent Price is a fascinating person. Again, incredibly recognizable in many ways. You might be surprised in which you'll find references to him. Taylor brought up Scooby-Doo. I was actually just watching Scooby-Doo not long ago, and they had a whole episode dedicated to a kind of parody of the Vincent Price character. So, yeah, definitely worth checking out if you want to learn more about it. I read the book Vincent Price, The Art of Fear by Dennis Michael. And you could check out this book here, which is Ghouls, Gimmicks, and Gold, which talks about this exact kind of era of horror cinema. Thanks.
And also, he's the narrator of Thriller, right?
Yeah.
We gotta give a shout out.
Oh yeah. I thought about playing it, and then I was like, y'all know it.
I just remember one point he says, to terrorize y'all's neighborhood. All right, I just wanted to remind my students here today, whether for extra credit or regular attendance, sign my sheet afterwards, or print your name on my sheet. So yeah, my title of my presentation is Tricks and Treats in Strange Darling. And I am going to be talking about the 2023 movie, Strange Darling. It was actually released in 2024 though. And I'm going to start though just for fun. I don't know if it really applies, but I got a quote from my favorite band. God forgive, but don't forget, send me an angel of death. So yeah, this movie bombed, by the way. So I don't really feel bad about spoiling it because it's sort of like I'm giving you an extended verbal trailer here, and you can see it or not see it. And even if you do know some of the twists and whatnot, I still think, actually viewing it, and I'm not even going to reveal all the twists, and I'm not going to tell you how it ends. So I still think you get a kick out of seeing it. But yeah, Strange Darling was written and directed by a guy named J.T. Mullner, who recently wrote the script for The Long Walk. Don't know if anybody saw that one, but big hit in theaters, I think, and I think he's somebody to keep an eye on. So yeah, he's got a lot of twists in this movie, and of course, when I think of horror movie and twists, the ultimate, of course, is The Sixth Sense. You're watching a whole movie about a little kid who says, "I see dead people," and then at the end, it's like, oh, the guy he's been talking to the whole time, Bruce Willis, he's a ghost too. So that's from 1999. I'm spoiling that one to you. But yeah, I love how at the end of the movie, like when they reveal that Bruce Willis is a ghost, they give you a big montage of scenes from earlier in the movie. And it's basically like, oh, like maybe if I paid closer attention, I could have figured out this guy was a ghost. I totally was surprised by that. I don't really guess twists that often. And I even know going into this movie that there was sort of a twist or you couldn't really trust everything. But I still couldn't predict how it was going to go. So how does it go about tricking us in this movie? And the distinction I want to make is, like I said, with The Sixth Sense, maybe you can piece it together. With Strange Darling, the movie is actively trying to deceive you and keep you from guessing the twist. So how does it do that? Well, misdirection is the big technique used throughout. Maybe you know what that means. I mean, obviously, if you're directing something, you're guiding somebody towards something, the movie guides you towards certain details. If you're using misdirection, you can fool people, and that might evoke a comedy, or it can evoke tension and horror, and that's what it's used for in this movie. So we start the movie with two black and white shots. One is a guy smoking in his car, and off camera we hear a woman say something like, "Are you a serial killer?" is the question. And by the way, the actor is Kyle Gallner. So for anybody who's a horror movie buff, already we have some information here. Kyle Gallner has been called a scream king, which is like the male equivalent of a scream queen. Jamie Lee Curtis, she's a scream queen. Just basically people who are in multiple horror movies. But yeah, he was in Smile 1 and, it was just called Smile, and then Smile 2. So great actor, but yeah, so after we get this "Are you a serial killer" shot, it's black and white, by the way. The very next shot we see is the same guy, except now he doesn't have a shirt on, and he's choking someone, but we don't really see who's being choked. It's just, we hear the sounds, and it sounds like a female voice choking. So you're like, oh, this is a bad guy, right? This is definitely a bad guy. The next thing we get is this text crawl. It's very reminiscent of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and maybe all the other ones too. I haven't seen them all, but yeah, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, famous for having this opening crawl and voiceover talking about this based on a true story. It's scary as hell. Something I'm summarizing there. So I want to read you this text crawl just because it's fun to read, and again, I'm not going to be able to do as great. I think the voice actor is Jason Patrick, but so it goes. Between 2018 and 2020, the most prolific and unique American serial killer of the 21st century went on a calculated multi-state spree that began in Denver, Colorado, continued through Grand Lake, and expanded across Wyoming and central Idaho before culminating in the dense forest of Hood River, Oregon. Drawing from police interviews, detailed accounts of eyewitnesses, depositions, and observations of various law enforcement, this is a dramatization of the true story of the final known killings in that rampage. So, for anybody who sees something like based on a true story, it gets suckered in, you might think, oh, wow, is this real? It's not. It's like the Blair Witch. Blair Witch was the ultimate, by the way. They really tried to convince people that was all based on a true story. But yeah, in Fargo, it's the same way. If you watch the beginning of Fargo, it's like, this is true. We just changed a few names or whatever. But yeah, so horror movies kind of like to do that, mess with us. But in particular now, we've got this opening thing, are you a serial killer? Then we learned the movie is about a serial killer. We must conclude that guy, Kyle Connors, the serial killer. He's not. Next, again, the movie's not even really going yet, but next we have a scene where a woman is running towards this camera, slow-mo, and she looks pretty forlorn. Oh, and she's missing her left ear. So we immediately feel sympathy for her, and a very mournful version of the song Love Hurts is playing. So, and here's where the credits start to deceive. We see credits comes up, Willa Fitzgerald as the lady. Okay, that's normal. But then the next one is Kyle Connor as the demon. So once again, Kyle Connor's a bad guy. We gotta watch out for that guy. He's a demon. But then again, it's not all what it seems like. And then so really the movie finally really gets started with a great car chase. And I gotta say, it's like, I don't know. I watch Fast and Furious movies these days. I'm like, I don't know what they're doing anymore. But just a really good old-fashioned, well-done, practical, whatever you want to call it. Not driving cars in space or anything like that. Just on planet Earth. This is just a great car chase, and it ends with so the lady. We've moved from the field, and then she's now driving in a Pinto, red Pinto, and the demon is in a truck chasing her. They're just barreling down the road, and suddenly he just slams on the brakes, skids 15 or 20 feet, gets out, gets on top of this truck, whips out his shotgun, and shoots out the back of her car. So she goes careening off the road, and then it becomes a foot chase. And I just wanted to bring that up because it's at this point that when he's chasing her through the forest and whatnot, that we get some lies really from the score. So if you don't know, score is the background music in movies. It's we can hear it, but the characters can't hear this music. It's supposed to guide us as to what to think or feel. So with the demon, and by the way, his actual name is RC, or at least that's his initials, we learn later. They do this really obtrusive score. No joke, it goes dun, dun. So you're again, more information presenting us that this is the bad guy. He's terrible. We got to watch out for him. But one thing I forgot to mention is that in the midst, before this car chase really culminates, and like I said, getting the back of the Pinto shot out, it interrupts with the title card. So the title card is just showing the title of the movie. And it says Strange Darling, and it says a thriller in 6 chapters. And I laughed in the movie theater when the next card that came up said Chapter 3. I'm like, oh, okay. It's one of those movies, like Pulp Fiction. We're going to get everything out of order and whatnot. So that's part of how the movie messes with us. I think I wrote down the order. It goes Chapter 3, then it goes to Chapter 5, then to 1, then to 4. And then to 2, and then to 6. So it's all over the place. And then there's actually an epilogue at the end too. And you can see how that would work to deceive us. We see what's going on in Chapter 3. We do not know what happened in Chapters 1 and 2 that led up to this moment. So that's another fun way the movie tricks us. And maybe you guessed the big twist by now, but it is in fact the lady who is the serial killer, not the demon. And again, you mentioned a female serial killer, of course, Eileen Wuornos. They made a movie about her called Monster. But when they use that word unique in the intro, that's clearly one of the things it must have been referring to. And the final sort of twist element I want to focus on is this is something where it might make people uncomfortable. The first time I heard about this movie, I think, was from a YouTuber named Cody Leach. He has a great movie and TV, I think, channel. And he said he saw the movie in 2023 because these YouTubers, they go to movie festivals and whatnot, see movies early. And he said a couple people walked out of the theater when he saw Strange Darling. And I don't know if he explained why, but I can tell why from having seen the movie. So when we finally get to chapters 1 and 2 and see all of what's played out and what led to this chase and everything, basically the chapter 1 has the two of them in his car outside his truck outside a motel, and so we find out that they just met in a bar. And this is basically like, hey, let's just, whatever, let's be whimsical and go to a hotel together and all that. And but they're having this little conversation, and the movie does this thing where occasionally it cuts to scenes later inside the hotel room, and then it'll cut back to earlier, them still talking. And she actually brings up the idea within the car, that's what she asked him if he's a serial killer. And she also just points out that her observation is that most women love casual sex, but they're just worried about maybe having murder be on the side or whatnot. So again, I love how the movie plays with our expectations. And again, normally in this scenario, that she would be the one under possible threat, but we soon learn later that he is in danger. But yeah, the first scene you see inside the hotel room is him choking her, and then we learn, she wanted him to do that later. It's a little game they're playing, and then it continues further where later it looks like, it's just headed towards an assault, murder, whatever. But again, we cut back to the car, and we see that they're going to do some role playing. She talks about doing some role playing, rough me up, and here's the safe word. By the way, the safe word is Mr. Snuffleup, I guess. So little humor thrown in there. And I think, again, ultimately this is where maybe sometimes horror movies push up against our either expectations or even our own tastes or whatever things I personally I don't go see the Terrifier movies because I don't need to see people just completely chopped up into bits or whatnot. But yeah, so this might be one that, again, the movie, one of the lines she says in the car is what does yes mean? Or what does no mean? And he says yes. And she's like, and once we get in that room, what is the only word that actually means no? And he says, Mr. Snuffleup. So, I will leave you with so a few more. There's a few more twists and mysteries. For example, you might want to wonder, beyond the deception, is there some reason why he's called the demon? Yes, but I'll let you figure that out if you see the movie. Why does the lady do these killings? That too is a reveal late in the movie. And finally, how did she lose that left ear? Well, you'll have to see the movie to find out. It's streaming on Paramount Plus, apparently. So, okay. And if y'all have any questions, we could try to provide some answers. Again, I'm not going to reveal that ending. So. Anybody have any questions? Was that that's true?
Do you want to ask that question?
Okay, well, go ahead. Yeah, question.
There were questions.
How do you all feel about horror? Are there types you like or types you hate, or do you have strong feelings either way? What are your thoughts?
Yeah.
It gets repetitive. You see the same thing, always pointed out, like the movie you was talking about, yeah, it's deceiving, but still, you could probably guess between the two of who it is.
I will say I complain occasionally about sequels in general. I see a lot of them, but I'm also the world's biggest hypocrite because I've seen every stupid Halloween movie, and that's just a guy going around stabbing people. It's not, and they come up with all these lines. It's not much more complicated than that. So yeah, it's definitely some repetition. And I just saw the trailer for the latest Scream. I'm like, oh my god. Please, needs to end. Yeah, I know. The latest, I'm going to spoil the last movie. There's three. The big twist in the first movie is that there's two killers. So, of course, they can fool you because you think, it's not this guy because he's here or whatever. But then when they reveal there's two killers at the end, people can be in different places. Well, by the movie, the last one was 6 or whatever, they had 3 killers. I'm like, how many more are we gonna? We got a whole, football team of killers next. And they're all dressing up in the Scream masks, and it's getting a little silly, but it's also one of those things where, like, if people keep showing up, they're gonna keep. I mean, they just had that Conjuring. What is it, The Last Rites, and they've already so there's a prequel. It's, gonna happen. And so yeah, it's just supply and demand. Okay.
I was just gonna say, I think the whole concept of how much we love to be afraid is fascinating. Because even when my kids were little, we do a lot of camping. But it became a tradition of when we sat around the campfire that I had to tell a ghost story, right? And so I had to I just made them up as we went, but I had to tell something that was age appropriate. So sometimes I would tell something and it would really start freaking them out, because it was something that they could imagine happening around them in that space, in the forest or wherever we were. And then I'd end up making it end with, something humorous with Scooby-Doo. Oh, it turns out it was whatever at the end. But I think that's just that whole concept of us loving to be afraid. And I don't know whether that's just kicking in that adrenaline or kicking in our imaginations or whatever that is, that we just love those feelings. We used to sit, when I was in elementary school, we would sit around and listen to Edgar Allan Poe on an old album. We'd have slumber parties and we'd listen to The Telltale Heart, because I don't know, we loved freaking each other out, whatever that was, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I really like to, I'm kind of a person that prefers to read it than watch it because I am scared. And my theory is when I read or I hear it a story, it can only ever be as scary as I can make it in my brain. But then people that make horror movies think of things all the time I could never have imagined. And I'm just I'm always scared, and those visuals will stay with me a lot longer than anything I can make in my brain. So, yeah.
I feel like a lot of people imagine themselves in the scenario a lot. But me as an actor, I tend to do that a lot by in scenes. So that's just kind of something I thought correlated in a way.
Yeah, adding on to that, I don't know, I just always love the thrill of it, and I love the eeriness of it, and that's all for you too, when I go camping, when I was even really young, I love imagining putting myself in there, and now I work at Creepy World, so I get to do that, so I don't know, I love it.
It's so fun.
Could each of you talk about a type of horror that you don't like? Taylor mentioned that at the beginning, and Tim, you touched on it, and Olivia just talked about it, but are there horror genres you prefer or stay away from?
It's a little tricky. A lot of the horror that I will actually partake in, I read. So I feel like that's because I can set it down and walk away and feel better and feel normal and nothing's gonna come for me and then go back to it. But I will say I probably am right up there with Tim mentioned types of movies where you're just getting chopped into bits or whatever, just for the gore. And that's not really what I enjoy.
That is certainly a tough question for me because I don't know if the shirt gave it away. I am a huge advocate of horror films. I don't just watch them in October, I watch them year round. So I watch classic ones, I watch ones 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, some of the modern ones. To say there's one genre that I don't like, I think over the years I've certainly have not liked the ones where they try to make it a little too realistic or involving, usually if it involves torture, I know that's a big one. I'm not usually a big fan of torture for torture's sake, or anything involving families. If I don't have to do that, sure. That's why I like Friday the 13th, because they're teenagers, they're all, there's usually something wrong that they're doing, and they're but it's still campy. It's a little different than some of the more modern stuff that's been out there. So that's the closest answer I've got, because I do enjoy a lot of the genre out there.
So I mean, again, I don't as much mind gore. I actually think it's kind of wild when they can make something feel realistic and it's kind of gross. Like that weirdly doesn't bother me, but I think it's like, I guess sometimes the supernatural ones, anytime a person's body is contorting in a way, I'm like, that's enough. I don't know. Even, I remember watching The Exorcist like way later in life, and it still of course freaked me out, but like, the bit where she's crawling backwards on the stairs, I think about that all the time. That one stayed with me. So anything with like two strange people, you can chop people into bits, no issue, but don't you dare do a back bend. I can't do that.
So there's a subgenre of horror called body horror, and I would have said, and I would still say that's not my go-to, like David Cronenberg are known for that, the director. But there was a movie made last year called The Substance, which got Oscar attention. Demi Moore was robbed. But she was great in that movie, and it's basically about a woman who has some new drug to take called The Substance. And she can transform herself into, there's a younger version of herself, but it comes out of her own body, out of her back and whatnot. So it's a very, like it's being, the new body is being birthed outside of her. So that was one I was like, I know this movie is going to be a big thing at award season, so maybe I should, and I was not like totally repulsed, but I did think it went like so over the top, again, that's really not my thing, and terrifying movies, I mean, I've heard about those, I haven't seen them, so I really can't get scared in horror movies anymore though, so I just look for movies that can evoke more like tension and whatnot, and the funny thing is I can remember the last time I was scared by a horror movie. It was a stupid movie called The Relic, and there's a monster, I think it was just the creature effects. There's a monster in that movie, and I think the creature effects were so convincing that even though I knew it was it was either a genetic thing, or maybe it was based on like, I don't know, some kind of other culture's mysticism, or a combination of the two. It was like a monster you knew could not exist, and yet when I was walking out of the theater, I was like, could there be some genetic freak monster right down the alley? So it's so stupid. But yeah, I get, maybe it's just like if you see enough horror movies over the years, it's impossible, or at least it's impossible for me to be scared by it. So it's more like, yeah, what do I think is just unpleasant to view and whatnot. So. Good stuff. Any other final questions or comments? Well, thanks for coming out, folks. Thanks for the library.